Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends. Thank you very much indeed for sharing this afternoon with us. It's my privilege to serve as the program director today, and I'm very happy to do that. We have quite a long program, so we're going to try and stick to time and finish at about 4:30 as intended on that program. Welcome to the third Professor Fatima Meer Memorial Lecture. It is an event that, as you know, commemorates the life of a great icon of our struggle. Professor Meer is well known. It's not for me to go through any biography, but simply to say that many of the things that were pioneered by Professor Meer, like decolonization research, which we refer to today, was something that she had already practiced from 1984 in the Institute for Black Research. And maybe Professor Zulu will tell you a little bit more about that later. But just to say a very warm welcome, may I acknowledge the Meer family, Judge Shanaz and Shamim, Nadia, and other members of the family who are here with us. I noticed that our former Vice-Chancellor, Professor Jairam Reddy, is here, and thank you, Jairam, for being here as well. Professor Betty Govindan and many senior other academics are here. I'm not going to go into the names, but those that I recognized, I was able to mention. Thank you to all of you for being present here today. To give you a welcome message from the organizers and the School of Social Sciences, I'd like to call Professor Mart.
Good afternoon and welcome everybody. I'm Rosina Mart. Our Dean of Social Science, Professor Ojong, is on leave, and she's asked me to please do the honors of welcoming you today. I was very taken aback when I found out that this was only the third annual Professor Fatima Meer lecture. I was a student at UWC in the 1980s. I'm from Cape Town, and had already heard of Professor Fatima Meer. So today, as we commemorate and remember and pay homage in some way to the magnificent work that she's carried out, we from the School of Social Science would like to acknowledge not only her incredible contribution, but also to say that we hope that the students who are studying with us currently will take forward her work in the manner with grace and dignity that she did. Social science, as you know, is composed of many clusters. We are an interdisciplinary school. And within the school, there are many ways in which we actually acknowledge the contribution that she's made to what we call the decolonial shift in the last decade, but clearly which was part of her focus very, very early on in her life, as was then known as the first non-white professor to have a position here. So to the Fatima Meer family, salam alaikum, welcome to all of you, and welcome to all of you who are in attendance today. The program is quite packed. I've been asked to speak for 3 minutes, and I believe I've managed to do that. Welcome. I'm sure we're going to have a very exciting time today. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mart. And now to welcome you on behalf of the organizing committee, Dr. Lubna Nadvi.
Thank you very much. Sanbanani, good afternoon, and a very warm welcome to our guests. Thank you very much, Prof. Chetty. I also have 3 minutes, so I'm going to try and keep it short. I just wanted to give some context to this lecture. So the idea to establish a Prof. Fatima Meer Memorial Lecture was first discussed in the School of Social Sciences in 2017. And it was only 5 years later that the first lecture event was held online. And we were very lucky to have very prestigious speakers deliver that first lecture. We are very grateful that we are now able to host this lecture in a hybrid format and in person so that we can reach a wider audience. The theme of this year's lecture has been carefully chosen after much consideration of Prof. Meer's legacy and the issues that she was passionate about. Given the similarities between apartheid South Africa and what is currently happening in Palestine, especially in the Gaza Strip, it is critical that these issues be ventilated through the academic and public spaces we occupy. Prof. Meer was a great advocate of the Palestinian people's right to political self-determination, and the lecture committee felt that it was appropriate to include this component of her work and activism in this year's lecture. And we hope that you will find this year's lecture inspiring and relevant. And while I have the podium, there will be a vote of thanks at the end of this event, but I wanted to, as chair of the lecture committee, thank all of our committee members for the hard work that they put into making this year's lecture happen. Thank you so much, and I hope that you find this lecture very inspiring. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Nadvi. Friends, just a few announcements that I've been asked to make, obvious ones. Keep your cell phones off. They shouldn't be ringing. Bathrooms are, when you leave the entrance there, on your right-hand side. There's bottled water available. Refreshments will be provided at the end, so you'll be okay. Fill out the registers which are being circulated, please. And importantly, the proceedings are being recorded. And some of these images may be used for documentary footage at a later stage. I've been asked to inform you of that. Let me also acknowledge on the podium Professor Monique Marks, and I'll introduce her in more detail a little later, Mr. Naim Gina and Professor Paulus Zulu, two of our keynote speakers and the respondent, and also Mr. Ramesh Harcharan, who is going to deliver a vote of thanks at the end, the man behind the scenes in the Institute for Black Research, who really single-handedly ran the Institute for many years. And I think we acknowledge and thank you for that, Ramesh. May I now invite Judge Meer to deliver a message from the Meer family.
Members of the university, friends and family, it is indeed a pleasure to be here today at this third Fatima Meer Memorial Lecture. My sister Shamim and I express our gratitude to the University of KwaZulu-Natal for paying tribute to our mother each year at the Fatima Meer Memorial Lecture, thereby keeping alive her memory and the values she embodied. My mother had a long and productive association with the university dating back to 1953. That year, she had her first job when Shamim was about 2 months old as a researcher to anthropologist Hilda Cooper of this university. Her research required her to undertake field work in the Newlands area, observing Hindustani rituals and traditions at births, marriages, deaths, and puja prayers, immersing herself in the community, its culture, its delicious food, all of which she thoroughly enjoyed. At the same time, and extracurricularly to her work as a researcher, our mother was very involved in organizing protest meetings against the Threatened Group Areas Act, speaking at many meetings alongside our father, Ismail Meer, Monty Naika, and Yusuf Dadu. As a result, suddenly, and indeed unsurprisingly, About a year into her job, she received a letter of dismissal from the government department that was responsible for her research. Soon thereafter, she was served with her first banning order, and so ended her first job with the University of Natal, as it was then known. Happily, however, my mother's association with the university resumed in 1956. That year, my father was arrested for high treason and became one of the accused in the well-known treason trial. Suddenly, our mother, at age 28, was confronted with newfounded responsibilities, taking care of her 3 children, running a home, trying to keep her husband's law practice afloat, and looking for some employment to fund all of this. Work was extremely difficult to find. She even tried unsuccessfully to become a teacher at a madrasa in Durban. This university, however, once again came to her rescue in the form of Leo Cooper, the head of the sociology department, and the husband of Hilda Cooper, for whom she had previously researched. Leo Cooper offered her a job at the university. The Coopers identified wholly with anti-apartheid politics, and Leo Cooper's study of the Defiance Campaign would go on to be published in 1957 and just as quickly banned. My mother described Leo Cooper as a liberal, non-racist who was not prepared to pamper the European patrons of this university and was trying to deracialize his department. Leo Cooper took my mother on as a tutor and promoted her to the position of temporary junior lecturer, thereby launching her career in sociology, and the rest is history. Of course, it has to be mentioned that at the time, her allowance into the university and ascendancy thereafter as a Black woman was unprecedented, path-breaking, not without a struggle, and against all odds, as it were. My mother went on to become a world-renowned sociologist, authored many books, taught here and abroad, addressed many conferences, and was to become president of the World Conference of Sociologists. Mostly during her retirement years, as many of you know, she established the Institute for Black Research at this university, providing a much-needed platform for Black research. So thank you, Leo Cooper, and thank you to this university. But our mother was so much more than a world-renowned sociologist. Her public persona was that of a courageous, selfless activist, a champion of the poor, independent-minded, and an orator of note. As her daughter, I grew up thinking there was nothing my mother could not do, from being a sociologist, political activist, orator, to an artist. Her paintings, whilst in prison, which are part of the permanent collection on Constitutional Hill, was the topic of last year's lecture. She was also a builder, an amateur architect, an interior decorator, an adventurous cook and baker of creative birthday cakes, wonderful storyteller and writer, a problem solver, comforter, advisor, and loyal friend to so many. Her talents went on and on. She achieved all of this in a seemingly effortless, sometimes haphazard way, with no airs and graces, mingling with all. But beyond all this, she had the ability to make us, her family, feel safe, nurtured, and loved. She was a matriarch in the true sense to her immediate and extended family, her siblings, her children, her grandchildren, and also to the community and society in which she lived. The late Chief Justice Ismail Mohammed beautifully captured the ethos of our mother in these words. Driven by a caring and sweet spiritual nature, an instinctive capacity for moral passion, and a consistent capacity to endure suffering with dignity, Fatima danced her way into our hearts and minds. And she was able to do all of this in no small way thanks to this university. I conclude by noting how fitting it is that this third Fatima Meer Memorial Lecture is concerned with Palestine, a cause not only profoundly topical today, but also close to my mother's heart. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Judge Meer, for giving us that heartfelt overview and for summarizing so succinctly, I think, all of the things that we remember about Professor Meer, both in this university and outside as activists. Thank you for that. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to have two keynote addresses today. The first by Professor Paulus Zulu and the second by Mr. Naim Gina, after which Professor Marx will respond, and we'll have some time for discussion, questions and answers and so on immediately after that. I think that, as Judge Meer has pointed out, the topic, struggles for freedom from apartheid, South Africa and Palestine, is particularly appropriate and relevant given this time in our history and what is happening in world history. And I think civilized people everywhere are appalled by what is happening in Palestine at the moment. And the parallels between the apartheid state and the state of Israel are obvious, and some may argue that it is many times worse in Palestine at present. There's a quote by Pape which says, "Immediately after the 1967 war ended, the 13th government of Israel began discussions that produced a series of decisions that all, in one way or another, condemned all the people who lived in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip to life imprisonment in the biggest ever human mega prison witnessed in modern times. The Palestinians living there were incarcerated in such a fashion for crimes they never committed and for offenses that were never ever pronounced, admitted, or defined. Today, a third generation of such inmates have begun their life in that mega prison. And I think that parallel with the intentions and objectives of apartheid and the possibilities of genocide and that existed in apartheid South Africa are actually parallels, and our speakers are going to delve into this in more detail. Our main speaker, our first keynote speaker, Professor Paulus Zulu, is Professor Emeritus and Director of the Morris Webb Race Relations Unit at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. He's a distinguished social scientist specializing in political economy with a notable career both nationally and internationally. Since 1984, Professor Zulu has authored numerous chapters in significant publications, such as in the Heifer Commission, An International Comparative Perspective, and Understanding the South African Political Culture. In 2013, he released a book entitled A Nation in Crisis, A Search for Morality, followed by his latest work, Momentous Epochs in the History of the ANC. His contributions extend to pivotal papers presented at international conferences on topics ranging from democracy and education to social exclusion and African nation building. Professor Zulu's recent academic contributions include the article, The Politics of Decolonization and Africanization of the Curriculum in the British Journal of Politics. Notably, from 1994 to 2022, Prof. Zulu was a member of the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences in Vatican City, Rome, where he also served as a council member until his retirement in 2022. Probably the most significant reasons why Prof. Zulu is such an appropriate choice to deliver a keynote address today are, firstly, He was such a close colleague and friend of Professor Meer for many decades, and both of us have been trustees on the Institute for Black Research since it was established by Professor Meer in 1984. I can't believe it was 40 years ago, Paulus. We are the last of the Mohicans. Having served with the likes of Professor Meer, Judge Louis Squia, Winnie Mandela, Gwenza Mlaba, Sats Cooper, Roy Padiachi, and others at IBR. And secondly, Prof. Zulu has always stood out as a beacon of morality. Like Professor Meer, unafraid to speak truth to power, and being the primary contributor to our seminal document at the Model Regeneration Movement entitled The Charter of Positive Values, where I have the privilege to serve with another iconic leader, Father Smangaliso Mkachwa. Professor Zulu, having your gravitas at this special occasion certainly contributes to its dignity, prestige, and relevance. Professor Paulus Zulu.
Thank you, Tesseract, for this lofty introduction, which I'm not sure I deserve. The Meer family, the University of KwaZulu-Natal, ladies and gentlemen, I'm never truly South African when it comes to these things where people say the mayor of Durban, this of that. I have always felt, goodness me, how does one remember all the big fish and the small fish in the room? So I'll say just ladies and gentlemen. I thought when I was asked to come and give this lecture that probably the best way to go about it is to think, if we sat together with Fatima Meer in her office over a cup of tea, or at times with some biryani which she always brought, what would we be talking about? What would she be saying regarding the state of the nation today, particularly in post-apartheid South Africa? My colleague will be speaking about what would she probably be saying about Palestine. Memorial lectures, like revival meetings, are intended as tools for restorative justice. The lives and heroes and heroines remind us of the ideals we fought for. The messages are intended as a consciousness raiser, questioning if we still stand by the commitment to achieve what we sought to achieve. In biblical times, there were prophets to caution against impending doom. Fatima Meer would have been both prophet and savior, for she would have foretold the impending doom and provided a solution to avoid the catastrophe. She would have posed the question, why is South Africa in such turmoil, post-apartheid South Africa? And would simultaneously provide the answer in one word: alienation. South Africa is a country alienated from itself, particularly post-apartheid South Africa, because apartheid of South Africa anyway was meant to be alienation, and the struggle was meant to be a cure for the alienation. Yet she would have said in one word: alienation. In this alienation, I want to center as the topic for today's memorial lecture and demonstrate how Fatima would have responded to the question. Now, first, the anatomy of alienation, and here I shall mention only the dominant features: anomie, expressed in endemic violent crime. South Africa is among the meta capitals in the world. Gender-based violence, which includes rape and femicide, multi-murders, drugs, extortions manifest in construction mafias and tax violence, which besides the tax wars includes the inordinate tax carnage. Corruption in government leading to a near collapse in public services, and worst, populism, accompanied by cheap rhetoric such as radical economic transformation, while behind the scenes looting the resources of the poor. The anatomy and etiology of alienation leading to anomie are systemic and affect almost all walks of life and have been a betrayal to the promise of democracy, which heroes and heroines like Fatima fought so hard to realize. The cause has been the decay in the political and moral fiber of the nation, a decay which has its origins in the character of the new political elite in our democracy as dispensers of public goods, which include shaping the public moral fiber. The pervasive systemic moral and legal decay in the body politic has resulted in total alienation from normative justice in the national psyche. South Africa has become a normless society where moral relativism has replaced the spirit of humanity. Consequently, South Africa is facing anarchy in the entire social order. When Mandela, who was a close friend of Fatima, called for reconstruction and development of the soul and appealed to religious leaders to help find a solution, he had become aware of the diagnosis. A brief analysis of each area will demonstrate the extent of body decay, anomie coupled with endemic violence. Our society has resorted to a knee-jerk reaction to any stimulus through chaos and destruction. A typical example is the chaos and violence caused by what is orchestrated as protest action and protesters behaving during strike action. For instance, a normal trip between Durban and Stanger takes about 30 minutes. However, it has become normal that such a trip takes over 2 hours on any day. Violent strikers, striking residents or workers might decide to block the road for any length of time without considering the inconvenience or harm caused to the rest of society. They might even stone or burn vehicles that pass by. The violence during strike action has no limit or discretion. For instance, health workers on strike have entered hospital wards and operating theaters, ranged with impunity intravenous strips and oxygen masks from patients, all in the name of working class solidarity. Communities disaffected by the absence of services such as water or roads decide to close down the schools where their own children learn, or burn libraries that service their own communities. It takes an alienated citizenry to destroy, to burn, even that which is intended to uplift and help them out of their lot. Anomie and violence seem to be synonymous with South Africa. One has to travel on any public road to witness chaos in the social order as taxis vie for passengers to the total disrespect of the driving rules. Worse, the carnage from taxi accidents, let alone taxi wars, as various operators fight for territory, has turned public transport into a graveyard. Similarly, South Africa has been named the femicide capital of the world, while simultaneously children and people who unfortunately were born without melanin get abducted and murdered for black magic. All this happens in a legal state and a society that purportedly upholds and promotes human rights. Concurrent with these atrocities, the country lives with organized crime, where construction mafias extort payments from construction projects, threatening to or actually blocking projects should their demands be rejected. Lives have been lost in these contestations. Second problem, corruption in government, leading to a near collapse in public services. That corruption and malfeasance are endemic in government is now a given. What the Commission into State Capture revealed was what the public already knew, except for the extent of detail and precision. As one commentator once remarked, it is not the cracking of the wagon that worries me. It is the inability to worry about the cracks and their frequency that baffles imagination. Thanks to the third estate, the media, when the government wishes to ignore the cracks, the media undertakes extensive investigations to inform the public about the rot in the state of Denmark. Hence, each time the revelations come, there is demonstrable evidence of the connection between the transgressions and the seats of political and economic power, or traceable webs of networks connecting transgressors to centers of power and influence. A very recent example is that of the network involving the transactions between the present Minister of Justice while she was mayor of Polokwane and operators in the VBS scandal. Observers and critics wonder where the minister stands with regard to the National Directorate of Prosecution's inabilities to secure access to the treasure trove of the Zondo Commission documents, which contains the data on state capture to pursue investigations leading to the prosecution of the people named in the report, realizing that the directorate falls directly under the authority, and she is the person to grant that access. Thirdly, the indignity of populist rhetoric. During one of our frequent conversations over tea at her office, Fatima once evoked great laughter when she remarked, "The UDF is a vendor of slogans. They say if you cannot buy our slogans, we shall have your head red." Presently, populist rhetoric dominates the political space. And in a country where the citizenry is plagued by poor education, populists flourish. During the 2024 general elections, 52 political parties contested the elections, each seeking a mandate to govern the country. Most thrive on slogans and marketing strategies such as rallies and izimbizos, redefined as consultative forums, just to amass sufficient support to create a seat for themselves in the national parliament. Given the levels of unemployment, one is not surprised. What is surprising is the ignorance of the electorate. For instance, given the revelations in the Commission into State Capture, including what the populace knows on their own, how would the elections of 2024 have elevated the corrupt and the visionless to triumph? Conversely, how do politicians blunder state resources intended to benefit society and still claim to fight for radical economic transformation, and the masses still believe them? Alienation. South Africa's anomie can be diagnosed through the lens of political entrepreneurs who have created a system of patronage and clientelage, which has not only promoted social closure, but has also immunized transgressors of whatever norms from both the legal and the normative processes. Hence, with the judicial system appearing to be the only pillar of social justice still intact, the political and legal systems have been limping for some decades, while the moral and therefore the social order is in chaos. The short narratives above typify a nation alienated from itself. For instance, viewed from one perspective, while protesters in the narratives are cutting their noses to spite their faces, a closer examination shows scars, a population alienated from the polity and with nothing to lose but their chains. What baffles the imagination is why governing authorities have turned a blind eye to this national self-destruction. Fatima, the prophet and savior. Fatima, the sociologist, would have studied and understood the morphogenesis of post-apartheid political normlessness and probably published a paper on the subject. However, Fatima, the academic activist, was a woman with visionary leadership marked by courageous, selfless engagement. It is in the latter context that in the 1980s, when discrepancies in opportunities between black and white to research and publish were stuck, she founded the Institute for Black Research to enable young black academics to engage in rigorous intellectual undertakings. A strong debater and a no-nonsense analyst, she once remarked to a white academic, "Why does the state refer to protesters as criminals? It is the operation of power. They first criminalize protest action and then redefine protesters as criminals." Such was her insight into issues. Similarly, when the youth of the 1980s propagated the slogan of liberation first and education later, Fatima called a meeting to her office. Present were Louis Square, Gwenza Mlaba, and myself. She informed us that the Hindu Tamil Institute in British Street was on sale and that she would lead us in preparing a proposal to the United States Agency for International Development to fund a school that would provide proper education for the oppressed. This was the foundation of Pambili, under the aegis of the Institute for Black Research, a demonstration that despite the slogan, we cared for the education of our children. Simultaneously, Pambili would have a wing to train stenographers and typists to service the post-apartheid government as the new executive would be would be comfortable in a loyal secretariat, realizing, however, that loyalty without efficiency would be problematic. When Pambili as a school was transferred to Rossborough in the new dispensation, Fatima turned the premises into a skills project in income generation for women. She always had a practical resolution for every social problem. And finally, Fatima's greatest gift and asset was her unquestionable integrity. I thank you.
Thank you, Professor Zulu, for your presentation. I think you've shown us quite clearly how legitimate struggle based on principles of morality and social justice could, after liberation or victory, go so wrong. And thank you also for explaining to us how Professor Fatima Meer would have responded to the situation that we face today. And I think we saw it in the latter stages of her life. She remained an activist and remained very critical of what was happening post-1994. And, Professor Fatima Meer was never materialistic, as you know. She was not a Marxist, but she had no affection for private property. And I remember once outside Pambili in Carlisle Street, she couldn't park her yellow VW, so she asked someone who was going past, "Can you park this car for me?" And the guy drove off with the car. And it was found a couple of days later. So private property wasn't something important to her. And I think that school, Pambili, was itself historic and significant. And as you know, came in for severe criticism from people who later understood why it was necessary to undertake those kinds of initiatives. But thank you very much, Prof. Our next speaker today is Mr. Naim Gina. He is a senior researcher at the Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflection, MISTRA, and a former executive director of the Afro-Middle East Center, whose research focused on the Middle East and the North Africa region. He is a member of the advisory board of the Center for Africa-China Studies, deputy chair of the Dennis Hurley Peace Institute, and advisory board member of the World Congress for Middle Eastern Studies. Mr. Gina has a master's degree from the University of Witwatersrand, where he also taught political studies. His research areas include global geopolitics, the South African state, Africa and the Middle East, amongst other areas. He is a sought-after analyst by various South African and global media. He has numerous publications to his name, his most recent being Nonviolence, Armed Struggle and Politics, a conversation with Ronnie Casserols. Others include Political Islam, Conceptualizing Power between Islamic States and Muslim Social Movements, Pretending Democracy, Israel, an Ethnocratic State, Jihad as a Form of Struggle in the Resistance Against Apartheid in South Africa, and the National Liberation Struggle and the Islamic Feminisms in South Africa. Mr. Naim Gina.
I was told that it's cold in Durban, and since I arrived last night, I've been looking for this elusive cold. We have different standards of what cold means. Let me start by saying that I feel privileged to be a South African and to live in South Africa. A South Africa that people like Fatima Meer and many others struggled and gave their lives for. Yes, I know all of the things that Professor Zulu said. I know that 30 years into our democracy, South Africa is one of the most unequal countries in the world. I know about our racialized, extremely high poverty levels. Almost a quarter of our people live below the food poverty line, more than a half below the lower bound poverty line. I know that our unemployment rate is the second highest in the world, because the highest right now is Palestine. I know that leaders of many of our impoverished communities in some parts of our country get assassinated almost routinely. I know that we have extremely high levels of corruption. I know that we are regarded as the femicide and rape capital of the world. I know all these things, which of course means that even in South Africa, I am also privileged. I have a job, I earn a decent income, I don't live below the poverty line, and I have not experienced sexual abuse. But I'm referring to a different kind of privilege here, the kind that allows me to say the things that I will say in the next few minutes, the kind that gives me the confidence that I can say the same things anywhere in the world and know that I won't be harassed when I return to OR Tambo. Of course, it also does mean that I can travel to fewer and fewer countries as the months go on, but that's no cost for trying to be principled. This is not a privilege to be taken for granted. It is a privilege that generations of our people fought for, gave their lives for, died for. People like Fatima Meer. Let me mention here, although I'll talk a little later about it, another person who gave their life for us to enjoy this privilege. I refer to him partly because Fatima Meer wrote a book about his life, and because his story is relevant both to the struggles for freedom from apartheid in South Africa and in Palestine. This was a young man after whom a street has been named in Amanzimtoti. Yes, his name was Andrew Zondo. The street is Andrew Zondo Road. Fatima Meer's book is The Trial of Andrew Zondo, A Sociological Insight, published 16 months after he was executed by the apartheid regime. By the way, the 38th anniversary of his execution will be in 9 days' time. I will speak a bit later, very briefly, about why Andrew Zondo is important to this topic. The topic for today is appropriate not only because Palestine is the topic of the day globally, but because Fatima Meer believed in the indivisibility of justice in the intersectionality of struggles for justice. And this was played out in her life, the stories that we heard from her family and from Professor Zulu about her, that justice for her was one big thing, that all forms of injustice needed to be fought and struggled against. Perhaps one of the massive demonstrations of this kind of intersectionality was in 2001 in Durban at the World Conference Against Racism. And Fatima Meer was there, right in front, organizing, leading, and inspiring from months beforehand, leading up to that event. And when Palestine is the moral issue of our age, then it's appropriate for us to focus on that, as I think she would have. I hate to talk on behalf of people who are not alive, so I'm not going to say that this or that is what she would have said or done. We cannot think that we believe in or fight for justice if we ignore Palestine and the genocide against Palestinians now. Similarly, for all the Palestine solidarity activists in the room, we cannot think that we support the Palestinian struggle, but at the same time remain oblivious to the struggle and the suffering in our own country, in our own neighborhoods today. No struggle for justice can be divorced from another. And if there's nothing else we remember of her life, then this, I think, would be enough, that struggles for justice are indivisible. This and the need to aspire to have the kind of principled courage that she always did. If I'm to talk about the Palestinian struggle against apartheid, there's a great deal I can talk about. I could talk about how the basis of Israeli apartheid is similar to South African apartheid, how, as in South Africa, Israeli apartheid first demarcated its population into different racial groups, then imposed different laws on different groups, separating where they lived, what quality of services they received, etc. The creation of ghettoized Bantustans in both cases for different groups, and the employing of repressive machinery, repressive security matrix to keep certain groups in their place. But I'm not going to talk about that. I could talk about how Israeli apartheid satisfies virtually every qualification for apartheid according to the International Convention for the Punishment and Suppression of the Crime of Apartheid, but I won't talk about that. I could talk about how Israeli apartheid goes way beyond South African apartheid. That while in South Africa the objective of apartheid was racialized capitalism, in Palestine it is and has always been ethnic cleansing and genocide. But I'm not going to talk about that either. Or I could talk about the intimate relations between apartheid South Africa and apartheid Israel. In intelligence, military cooperation, nuclear weapons development, etc. But I won't talk about any of these because the topic is not about Israel's apartheid. The topic for today is about the struggles against it. And because right now, we do not have the luxury of waxing lyrical about academic questions, not while we are in the middle of a genocide that is set to change world history. Or rather, I should say, in the midst of a genocide and the resistance to it that are set to change world history. The ICJ, the International Court of Justice, ruled on the 19th of July last month that Israel's occupation of Palestinian territory is illegal, as is its colonization of Palestinian resources, that all its settlers should be removed, that reparations must be paid to Palestinians, etc., etc. All very important rulings. I mention this only because the occupation and colonization of a people under international law conveys certain rights on that people. Among those rights is the right to resist. This is highlighted in numerous UN General Assembly and Security Council resolutions relating to colonized peoples in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, mentioning specific contexts and peoples, and some of those resolutions even mentioning the Palestinian people. Colonized and occupied people have the international law right to resist their colonization and occupation, including by armed means, as is clear in many of these resolutions. 7th of October 2023 represents one of the high points in that resistance for the Palestinian people. It was an audacious, well-planned, brilliant, and spectacular operation that took place on that day. It was for the Palestinian resistance in Gaza and intelligence and military success in many ways. Were there mistakes that were made on the 7th of October? I'm pretty sure that there were. But let me here bring up the relevance of why I mentioned Andrew Zondo, apart from the fact that Fatima Meer wrote a book about him. Andrew Zondo is famous now, was executed, has a street named after him, because in September 1985, he set off a bomb in a shopping mall in Amanzimtoti, the place where the street is named after him. In the explosion, 5 people were killed. 3 of them were children. I have never, and I still do not, agree that civilians can be targets of any struggle. I still don't believe that. So I don't support the act of placing a bomb in a shopping mall and killing civilians. I do, however, believe that Andrew Zondo is a hero of our struggle, a martyr of our struggle, and as such deserves the respect that he has been given by having a street named after him. So, were there mistakes that happened on the 7th of October? Quite possibly, yes. Does that mean that the strategy of armed struggle against an apartheid and colonizing state is wrong? No. Wrong tactics do not mean that a strategy is wrong. Also, let's not forget that of the 1,200 Israelis that were killed on the 7th of October, there were others killed. There were about 200 Palestinians who were killed, fighters. So we shouldn't say 1,200 people were killed on the 7th of October. 1,400 people, 200 of whom were Palestinian fighters. Of the 1,200 Israelis who were killed, hundreds of them were soldiers who were specifically targeted, soldiers and officers who were specifically targeted, and others were civilians. Of the civilians that were killed, we now know from Israeli media and their investigations that many of them were killed by Israelis. Many of them were killed in that music festival. Many of them were killed by Israeli helicopters. In the kibbutzes where people were killed, many were killed by tank shells, Israeli tank shells, because Palestinians don't own tanks. What is required is an independent investigation to ensure who was responsible for the murder of those civilians and then holding them to account. That is not going to happen. It will not happen because Israel refuses to allow any independent investigation into anything that happens. It also won't happen because Israel, over the past 10 months, has been systematically destroying the evidence that might assist any investigation that might take place. But perhaps the Palestinians' biggest mistake in planning for the 7th of October attack, the biggest mistake was thinking that Israel would treat Palestinians as human beings when they respond. On the 7th of October, on the 8th of October, the Israeli defense minister spoke about how he was going to deal with the Palestinians, not the fighters, the Palestinians in Gaza, who were, he said, human animals. His prime minister responded immediately thereafter to say it's not correct, because that kind of statement is an insult to animals. You're talking about 2.3 million people in Gaza, more than half of whom are refugees, made refugees in 1948 and then made refugees again in 1967. Now, those people have been made, in the past 10 months, have been made refugees 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 times over, displaced numerous times. But after October the 7th, nothing will be the same again. Not only for Palestinians, not only for that region in which Palestine is situated, but for the whole world. 7th of October was a preemptive strike, we might say, by Palestinians for a number of reasons. One is that we know that there was a process that was on the verge of being completed, and that is normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia, normalization of relations. And we know that if that happened in October, November, December of last year, by now there'd be a number of other countries that would have followed suit, Pakistan and a few others. And so it was a preemptive attack against that kind of normalization, which intended to forget the Palestinian struggle, to cause the world to forget the Palestinian struggle and move on as quote-unquote normal. It was a preemptive strike on an escalating form of colonization that was taking place, particularly in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, because East Jerusalem is part of the West Bank. A colonization led by an extreme right-wing government, the most right-wing government that Israel has had, which is saying quite a lot, the most racist government it has ever had, and one that completely kowtows to the settler movement. Many of its ministers are from that settler movement. It was a preemptive attack against the ongoing and strengthening attacks on religious sites in Palestine, Christian and Muslim, and in particular the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which, while Muslims regard it as a Muslim sacred place, Palestinians regard it as a national symbol. When I said that 7th of October has changed everything for the world, one of the things we should note is the South African case at the International Court of Justice. That this case and others that have followed have come now to challenge the very notion of international law, the very idea of what international law means and who it serves and who it is supposed to serve. It suggests a new rising up of the global South in claiming its rights. Because international law has never been designed, was never designed to serve people of the global South. It was never designed to address the problems that we have. It was designed, international law, the rules of war, the so-called rules-based order, all of these things were designed in order to regulate conflicts between civilized people, people of the North, not us. It neither was supposed to serve us or be useful against us. We were not part of the equation. Remember, when these discussions were taking place about the rules of war, etc., decades after this, one might say even a century or two after that, Germany committed a genocide, 2 genocides, in our neighborhood, in Namibia, against the Nama and Herero people. The same Germany that in the mid-20th century committed multiple genocides against Jews, against Roma, and against other people. And so, when it happened there, then you needed international law to come in, because you couldn't allow civilized people to act against each other in this kind of way. It didn't matter what they did in Namibia or in Congo. And so it was never meant to serve us. Post 7th of October, the Global South is saying, no, we claim this. You know who introduced the term human rights into the United Nations Charter in 1945? A great South African man introduced the term human rights into the UN Charter, and from there we had something called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. His name was Jan Smuts, who ruled over an apartheid state in South Africa before apartheid was even a policy. Because human rights wasn't supposed to serve darker-skinned people and people of the South. That is now changing. After the 7th of October, you cannot talk about international law and human rights in the same way as you did before that. If we want to support the Palestinian struggle, let me make this clear if I haven't already, you cannot support it without also supporting the resistance choices that Palestinians make. Just as we insisted in the past that you cannot support our struggle if you don't support the resistance choices that we make, especially if these choices are rights granted under international law. And I make this point because there's a trend now, especially in the West, of people claiming to be pro-Palestinian but distancing themselves from the resistance. Some solidarity groups in some countries in the West now, I just saw, are calling on people not to mark the 7th of October because it sounds too much like you support the resistance. So have no activities on the 7th of October, no activities on the 5th, which I think is a Saturday, no activities around that period. Later in the month, maybe. That kind of an attitude doesn't do Palestinians any favors. Even worse is when Palestinian groups themselves distance themselves from the resistance. The Palestinian resistance that is fighting against the genocide taking against their people, and here taking place against their people. And here, of course, the most obvious one, of course, is the Palestinian Authority. And we have parallels of the Palestinian Authority in our own country in the Apartheid era, the Bantustan administrations that we had, which not only does not support the resistance, but actively acts against it in collaboration with the Israelis. What Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority, called, what he said, that security coordination with Israel was, in his words, sacred. There was a Palestinian civil society organization that a few months ago, 2 months ago, in May, issued a statement congratulating all of those students who were involved in the encampments in the US, in Europe, etc., but then added an advisory note advising them to stop praising the resistance. This is a Palestinian group. Perhaps they should heed the words of George Habash, the founder of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, who said that the Palestinian fight might require a century, we hope not, and those with no stamina or patience should step aside. And all the while that Palestinian resistance is being repeatedly delegitimized, Israel's war machine is being supported with the most sophisticated weaponry. From the United States, this past week, the 500th, in 11 months, less than 11 months, the 500th shipment of weapons was delivered. From Germany, the second largest supplier of weapons to Israel, who was not content with having committed 2 genocides at the beginning of the 20th century, multiple genocides in the middle of the 20th century, is now supporting another genocide in Palestine. So, remember Germany. These states, especially the United States, don't just support Israel, they are major proponents of the extermination of the Palestinian people. They are genocide enablers, and they are guilty of that under the Genocide Convention, the same convention that South Africa used in the ICJ. Thus, being in solidarity with the Palestinian people, almost by definition, now places one on the opposite side of some of the most powerful governments in the world. We must remember also the spate in the past few weeks under a Labour government in Britain of terrorism charges against Palestinian solidarity activists. Or the clampdown in Germany, going on for even before October last year. But despite all this, the world has changed after the 7th of October. And our responsibility as South Africans, as people who gather to listen to the ideas and the life story of Fatima Meer, our responsibility is to be part of that changing world post 7th of October and to push it forward. The ICJ case is one way in which South Africa is doing that. We need to step up our solidarity activities. We need to increase our efforts to isolate Israel and its supporters, boycotts, divestment, and sanctions campaign, including its genocidal supporters in our own country. Those who are at universities, and we sitting here at a university, you cannot be a student or an academic at a university anywhere in the world and ignore the fact that every single university, all 12 universities in Gaza have been destroyed. Not collateral damage, they have been specifically targeted. Bombs placed and designed to destroy them and been destroyed. Along, of course, with almost every single hospital, almost every single school, etc. in Gaza. The term scholasticide is now being bandied around about what's happening in Gaza. Can South African universities remain silent in the face of this? Those of you from UKZN, can you, as a university, remain silent? Has your university taken a position on the genocide, firstly, an issue that's not just, it's not yet just another skirmish. It's a genocide, the greatest crime under international law. It's a genocide, something that doesn't happen every couple of years or every few months. Have our universities made statements about, has your university made a statement about the genocide that's taking place in our time? Has your university made a statement about the scholasticide that's taking place, about the planned destruction of every single university that served 2.3 million people? Has your university taken a position to make it clear that it will no longer have any more relations with any Israeli institutions, as Palestinians have been calling for? Because almost every Israeli institution of higher learning, almost every one of them, is involved with the occupation project of the Israeli occupation forces, is involved with doing some or other research for the Israeli Defense Forces, or some or other research about the demographic threat that Palestinians pose, or some or other research that feeds in to the genocide that is taking place. And finally, that we also have the responsibility to support, as I said, the choices of resistance that Palestinians make, and to do so unapologetically, to ensure that we view events that take place from a Palestinian prism, not an Israeli prism. I hear too often Palestinian supporters even talking about, what happened on the 7th of October was a major intelligence failure of the Israelis. No, it was a major intelligence success of the Palestinians. Why was it that Israeli Air Force planes didn't take off for hours after the attack began? Not because the Israelis failed, but because the Palestinians succeeded in what they had planned. We can have a discussion about this later. How was it that Palestinians who had never been out of Gaza because it's been under hermetic siege for, 2 decades, were able to find intelligence bases, military bases outside of Gaza with a list of officers that they needed to kidnap? How is that possible? This was a massive success. If we look at it from the Israeli perspective, we talk about how the Israelis failed. No, we have to look at it from the Palestinian perspective. And we have to ensure that the perspective of the resistance is heard and is understood. We should also oppose the rhetorical use of the resistance to win points against Israel supporters. So, for example, you'll read articles in the paper. I just read one by Max Duprier. Very good article. But you suggest that Palestinians are barbaric in order to make the point that you shouldn't be supporting Israel. I'm sorry that's not necessarily the case. I can be fully supportive of Palestinian resistance and still say that Israel is committing a genocide. And the Palestinian resistance is not just what is in Gaza. Look at now what is happening in the West Bank. A glorious resistance in Nablus, in Jenin, in Tulkarm. The assassinations of the leaders of that resistance over the past few days. The stated intention now by Israelis to use the Gaza model in the West Bank, and they've started by destroying buildings, destroying infrastructure, etc. In closing, I want to quote a very close friend of Fatima Meer, Nelson Mandela. Madiba said in 1999, as president of the Republic of South Africa, not just president of the ANC, when he was seated next to PLO chairperson Yasser Arafat in Gaza, he said, "All men and women with vision choose peace rather than confrontation, except in cases where we cannot proceed, where we cannot move forward. Then, if the only alternative is violence, we will use violence." A few weeks later, Palestinians launched the Second Intifada. Palestinians cannot proceed. They cannot move forward. If we fail them, and if we fail the calls for real solidarity from Madiba and from the Palestinian people, if we fail to live up to the standards of courage and principle that Fatima Meer's life demands of us, we will forever be known as the generation that watched an unfolding genocide live and did nothing to stop it. Can there be a greater shame than that?
Thank you, Mr. Gina, for your powerful presentation. You spoke with such conviction and even fury, and whilst you were speaking, Monique was also furiously taking notes, so we look forward to her response. But very briefly, the one thing I would like to respond to is the question of the role of academics, academia, universities, scientific organizations, and so on. And I think you've made your case clear. I serve on the board of the International Sociological Research Association and preside over one of the research committees where there are 15 members of the board, and we put together a statement, just a statement, and it was opposed by 10 members of the board, which gives you some idea of the extent of the division and what it is doing all over the world. But shocking, because these are supposed to be academics and intellectuals with critical minds and so on, but are totally overcome by the mainstream media and narratives that are ridiculous. But that's what we face in our intent to introduce progressive politics in academia. But thank you for that presentation, Mr. Gina. I would like to now call Professor Monique Marx, a former head of the Urban Futures Center at Durban University of Technology, where she led pioneering research initiatives in urban safety, drug policy interventions, and urban design until February 2024. She now practices privately as a health coach and clinical social worker and is associated with the University of Stellenbosch. An esteemed researcher, Professor Marx held the position of chair at the Human Sciences Research Council Press and has been actively engaged in global drug policy dialogues. Her influence has extended internationally as a visiting research professor at the Australian National University. Additionally, she directed the Belhaven Harm Reduction Centre, a crucial facility providing medical and psychosocial services daily to 200 vulnerable individuals affected by drug use disorders. Her expertise is further enriched by her credentials as a certified health coach and a registered social worker, emphasizing integrated medical interventions. Professor Marx will respond to both presentations. Professor Marx.
Thanks, Dasrath, and to the organizers for inviting me, for not recognizing that description of myself. I thought I would just begin. I've written things down. There's one person in this room who will understand that I cannot actually read my own notes, and that is Fatima Meer's daughter, Shamim, who taught me at Wits and called me into her office at the end of my one exam because she couldn't read my handwriting, so I had to read it to her. So Shamim, I have that here today. So if I'm incoherent, at least you know why. I'm deeply honored, not just because of what this represents, this memorial lecture, but as you can gather, my long history with members of the Meer family, which continues to today in Durban, as we have forged solidarity between us around the Free Palestine movement. And I'm deeply grateful to have those connections still with the Meer family. I wanted to just raise a few thoughts that came to mind, some from the speakers and some just independently. Yesterday, I went to King Dinizulu Hospital to see one of my clients, or what other people call patients, in the psychiatric ward there. I don't know if anybody knows, but the psych ward is called the Fatima Meer building. And I thought to myself, how incredible is this? That you have a social scientist whose name is fronted in a psychiatric ward. What does this mean? When I think of psychiatric patients, I think of the most vulnerable of vulnerable people in our society. These are people who are not sick, but are highly traumatized. And their trauma has resulted in a series of diagnoses, often which are wrong. And their treatment in psych ward is often one that is a human rights abuse, which was my reason for being at the hospital yesterday, was to take up a complaint for a patient who was in there who had been beaten up at the hospital in the Fatima Meer building. I want to front this because I think that the struggles, as both Paulus and Naim have mentioned, not only between countries, but between people suffering for different reasons at a much more local level, are extremely important for us to recognize. And if we are to see that, then we can understand why a psychiatric ward is named after a social scientist. It is not as incongruous as it would seem on the front of it. I also wanted to raise a couple of other points that aren't really in relation to the speakers, but I will come to that in a minute. I came to Durban in 1996 from Johannesburg and joined the sociology department. And I just remember the name Fatima Meer was a name that reverberated in the passages of sociology for the entire time that I was here. I left in 2014. She remained present despite not being physically present, and very much still informs what happens in this university. Another observation which hasn't been raised today, but I thought that I would raise it because it's pertinent, is to say that Fatima Meer's commitment to bringing people together and to understanding what the speakers have referred to as different forms of intersectionality come from her own lived reality of a family which itself had within it a diversity of people. For those that don't know, and I hope that I have this correct, Shamim and Shanaz, your grandmother's original name was Rachel, but she reverted to Islam from Judaism and became Amina. And I think that there's a story there that is incredibly important, because as a member, as tangential as it may be, of the Jewish community myself, these are stories that we need to tell because they remind us not of separation, but of our common humanity and the threads that bring us together in the midst of the binary conversations that are important, Naim. They are very important. But so too are the conversations about the voices of people that are trying to create a different narrative in this very divisive space that we find ourselves in. And if I think of the work of Fatima Meer in relation to the struggles of women across all social divides, what comes to mind in relation to Palestine is the role that women would play in sewing the threads amongst and between each other to make that part of the world safer for everybody that lives there. And I mean everybody. Because at the end of the day, as Arundhati Roy so aptly reminds us, we are all just accidents of birth. We do not choose where we are born to or who we are born to. These are the accidents of birth that make us all one common humanity. So Naim, I'll begin with you, just because that's the thread of my thought now. And my question is, what do we imagine in the sociological imagination as to where we go in this place called Palestine and in this place called the Middle East, where at the moment the imagination has been shut down? And that is a real problem. Because without this imagination, which is, I think, what makes sociology so powerful, and that is the location of Fatima Meer's scholarship, without that imagination, it's incredibly difficult to know where we take resistance and where it ends up. It is not to diminish the importance of resistance, but to say, how do we create an imaginary within that resistance movement? Because that too is important. You've spoken about tactics and how important tactics are and how they relate to strategy. But what we lack is knowing where those strategies and tactics take us in the end. And that, I think, is part of our responsibility as scholars and as students, as universities, as researchers, as activists. And it's one that we are all struggling with. It's a real problem. What I like both about the way in which Paula speaks and the way in which Naim speaks is the lack of apology of the perspectives which both of you bring to the table, both of which are controversial, but both of which penetrate and make us think of what is it that we're living in, not just here in South Africa, but in this very messy global world that we are part of, whether we are North or whether we are South. And so, Naim, you did not directly respond in relation to Paulus, but your point about your own privilege as living in a country where you have the right to say what you want to say, to speak as you wish, to align a little bit with Steve Biko, is extraordinary. It is truly extraordinary. And we should not take that for granted. So, Paulus, you're completely correct in all of the many failures that we as South Africa have to live with today. But for me, it's always the most vulnerable of people that we need to think about when we consider this place that is racked by domestic violence, by drug use, by social discord, by political corruption, by a lack of care, by populism, by all the many problems that you raised, Paulus. So when we go back to the very beginning, Dasrath, of your contribution to this lecture about the importance of Fatima Meer's work in the space of decolonization, my provocation there is to look away from the past and what colonization has done to us in the past and in the present, and to look towards what is happening currently and in the future, and to think more about how disenfranchised people still in South Africa are staring into a very dark space, which I refer to as the burden of the future. A future with no prospects of employment, with no prospects of connection to social institutions, a future where families are destroyed and falling apart, a future where drugs are not a problem, but a solution to an already existing problem. That is where we need to be looking. And how we understand the burden of the future in the context of this theorization of decolonization, I do not know. But what I do know is that it's incredibly important for us to start looking at what is on the horizon rather than what is behind the horizon, if we are really to penetrate where it is that we are going to. Whether that is within South Africa or whether it is within Palestine, what people in both of these places are connected by is the burden of the future. And we do not see beyond it. I do not see beyond it, Naim and Paulus. I cannot. And so you are both correct in saying that universities have a critical role to play in this. And the silence of the majority of South African universities reverberates all the time. It is shocking. It is absolutely shocking, with the exception of, I think, the University of the Western Cape. There have been no coming togethers to make any statements around the burden of the future, either of Palestine or, quite frankly, of South Africa. Because many of our students in these universities themselves confront the burden of the future. It is not out there, it is right in here. And I think we need to remember that. Naim, your talk reminds us and takes us back through the remembrance of Zondo, the remembrance of October the 7th, of the notion of the just war, which we don't speak about anymore, but we certainly did. But that is essentially what you are talking to and talking about. And so it's important for us to go back to understanding what a just war is and to theorizing what this just war looks like right now, but also what the justice is behind the just war, so that we move away from rhetoric towards something that I think Fatima Meer's work is so fundamental in doing, and that is in explaining not just things theoretically or descriptively, but normatively. In other words, what should reality look like? Not just what is reality, but what should it be? And I think we scared away from normative explanations, but it actually really is where we should be going. And another thing that is currently missing in sociology, and particularly in the two spaces that we're talking about today, sorry, this is what happens when you are short-sighted, and so you have to do this, right? Is comparative sociology, is trying to make some kind of comparisons that have a basis in the imagination, which I think is lacking. So Naim and Paulus, we make these statements and they are received in a variety of different ways, because populism doesn't just exist out there, Paulus. It exists within the academy too, because we have become atheoretical. We have lost this ability to engage conceptually in explanatory terms, and we just talk, but without going back to what the foundations of sociology are. And it is about finding ways to explain things so that we can make the changes that need to be made. I'm struck, and part of the reason that I'm no longer in a university, not the only one, is because I think we have lost this notion of public intellectuals in the university space. I felt completely lost in the last couple of years when I was located at the Durban University of Technology, having left the University of KwaZulu-Natal, having left the University of the Witwatersrand, having left. And these departures for me are moral departures. They are departures from places that I feel are not responding to the social realities in which we live. And if they are responding, the responses are to reinforce injustice rather than to change it. And that, for me, is a reason to leave, not to stay. But that is my choice. So for people who remain within the academy, the provocation is to return to an explanatory form, to a normative form of theory and explanation, and to comparative sociology, which gives us so much insight into how things are similar and how they are different, but mostly what the imagination of living with freedom could and should be like. All of this, Paulus, takes us back to your core point about alienation. We are alienated not just from one another, but from the critical thinking that makes universities what they should be, places where people come together to pierce the socio-reality and to understand what is going on beneath what we see, so that we understand with more clarity and so that our actions have more impact than they currently do. Because if universities can't do that, then how on earth do we expect citizens to do it? Whether they are in Palestine, or whether they are in South Africa, or whether they are in Germany, Naim, I do not know. There has been at UKZN, the place where Fatima Meer was located when it was the University of Natal, which it was when I came here, a decline not only in activism, but in what I think fundamentally speaks to what Fatima Meer was, and that is somebody who lived in the morality of the moment, to quote Bauman. For her, it was always about what is the moral dilemma that confronts us in the moment and how do we respond, not in a way that is a broad stroke, but in a way that speaks to the injustices in that moment with solutions that are relevant in that moment. And they change. They are not constant. Her profound work within the women's movement in South Africa is where I want to end, because I truly do believe that it's the stitches and not the sewing stitches, but the stitching of the wounds that we all hold, whoever we are, that create trauma, which do not allow us to move forward. And it is women, I think, that are able most profoundly to do that stitching. And it is that belief in women, I think, which drove the work of Fatima Meer primarily to bring together women, to imagine what justice could look like. We don't have these movements anymore that we used to have. And that, I think, is truly tragic. When I think of the woman in Palestine, I have no understanding of how those scars that are located in trauma, both big and small, can ever be removed. I do not know how that happens. And I'm reminded of that every day and every time I walk through the Fatima Meer building at King Dinginzulu building, hospital, where those people in the psychiatric wards are not faulty people. They are people living with scars, and those scars come from trauma. And what psychiatric ward will be big enough for Palestinians and South Africans to house themselves in as we heal, we move forward, we recognize just wars, but we also recognize that we do have a common humanity so represented in the family of Fatima Meer. Thank you.
Thank you, Monique, for a comprehensive response to both the speakers and the deliberations. You ended on the note of trauma, and I'd like to quote something that I picked up. It says, in 1977, a year before he killed himself, the Austrian writer Jean Amery came across press reports of the systematic torture of Arab prisoners in Israeli prisons. Arrested in Belgium in 1943, while distributing anti-Nazi pamphlets, Amery himself had been brutally tortured by the Gestapo and then deported to Auschwitz. He managed to survive, but could never look at his torments as things of the past. He insisted that those who are tortured remain tortured and that their trauma is irrevocable. And I think therein lies the challenge for all of us. I'd like to immediately now open it up for questions. We've got about 15 minutes to hear any questions you might want to ask specifically of any one of the speakers, or if there's any comments you would like to make, we'd be very happy to hear that as well. You could begin by mentioning who you are, and then go ahead with your question or comment.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Zulu. I'm the former SRC member of UKZN. We'll start by saying that I'm trying to bring a few comments to the lecture that was delivered here. So the question was that why are universities so silent? Last year, we, as the SRC, we put a question to the institution to say, why are you being so silent as well? And we took a stance as the SRC at the time to say that any relationship with the Apartheid Israel must be scrapped, and any form of research that is being traded across UKZN and any institution of Israel must be completely scrapped. And we're clear on that. But the response this week is that you are stepping on eggshells, which means to say that these universities are all for profits maximization more than human rights itself. Because you cannot shy away from the genocide that is happening there by Palestine, and you asking us to be silent on these such matters is very cruel to you as a person as well. Currently, people are still fighting, and currently people, especially black people in South Africa, are still fighting to be recognized as human beings, even today. The legacy of apartheid lives among us today. All of the speakers mentioned that this is the most unequal society ever in the world, and is being racialized. But every time we're in the space, we're being told to forget and move forward with the future. It's like telling a Jew to forget about Holocaust. Every time that we say that this legacy is being institutionalized, white supremacy is being institutionalized in every aspect of our lives. We take regard that universities as a microcosm of society. There's still white supremacy that prevails each and every time. And this genocide that is prevailing there by Palestine, even if we take a stance about it, there's always going to be silence, as student leaders as well, to say that you are stepping on a profit maximization, share profits to be able for them to please these white anxieties of people who are standing with Zionist Israel. So we are confronting an issue here. We have an issue of also academics, professors, doctors, who are detached from realities of such atrocities in the world, who are so detached just to a point where they tell you for themselves that if you take a stance, you must also understand that on the 7th of Apartheid, on October 7th, sorry, on the October 7th, the Hamas group created a huge atrocity in Israel. disregarding the fact that more than 2 decades now, people of Israel, the people of Palestine have been fighting for self-determination even till now. So it's a case that they will look as also only the October 7th to justify their means of invading, whereas the struggle for resistance has always been there, and there's no form of solution that has been come forward until now. So as young people of this kind, we are growing. We are saying that even if we form government today, opposing the GNU that is currently there, the current government is so silent because there are people of the Democratic Alliance in the cabinet who are strictly standing with Israel on this part. There's not going to be any South Africa that is bold enough to take Israel to court and have a clear stance on to say they are opposing to Israel because they have accommodated and wanted to ease these white anxieties in government, and for us to continue to be silent on such matters. So even if we come as young people today, we are clear on that mandate that we support Palestine because the struggle of Palestine is a struggle of ours even today in South Africa. Apartheid didn't end. It continues today, and we're still living the scars of our forefathers and our fathers even today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's take 2 or 3 comments or questions before we ask the panel to respond if they would like to.
Good afternoon. My name is Orleen Naidu, and I come from Chatsworth. And I think if you know Chatsworth, then you know that Fatima Meer was very involved. I came a bit late, so I don't know whether there was any reflection, or any memories brought forward of great involvement in Chatsworth. I think Fatima Meer, we are so privileged to be here, and we're thankful to the College of Humanities for recognizing her and having this memorial lecture. Because personally ourselves, we don't think that Professor Fatima Meer was given the recognition in South Africa that she should have been given as a woman, not just involved in post-apartheid, in the apartheid struggle, but more involvement in the post-apartheid struggles in South Africa. She was a powerful woman. Yes, in 2001, she brought thousands of people to the fore under the banner of the Concerned Citizens Forum. During that period, we in Chatsworth were facing evictions and disconnections. And when we thought that we had nowhere to turn to, we were sent an angel. Fatima Meer, 3 days out of hospital, with strict instructions not to leave her bed, she came to Chatsworth to save our people from being evicted. And those struggles, we continue to recognize our people in Chatsworth have been saved because people are still living in the same homes that they were evicted from. We have running water and electricity because of Fatima Meer's involvement. And let me just say that Ramesh was very then. We were common people, we didn't know our rights. She raised us up to the people we are today. She taught us our rights, made us great leaders in Chatsworth. Up until today, we still engage the municipality where we think that they're being unfair towards our people. She created a dossier that our government used. When we had issues, together with Ramesh, she played a crucial role then. She created a dossier where our issues were outlined. But she didn't go to the city officials with just issues. She went with recommendations. And truly, I must say today that the free basic water that people are enjoying is because of Fatima Meer. The basic services that are given to free to the poor, it's because of Fatima Meer. Although we have those recommendations that were proposed by Professor Fatima Meer, the will to actually implement by our government is lacking. And therefore, still thousands of our people are still, not living the rightful lives that they should be living. So I must just say that we are very grateful. We love Fatima Meer. We remember her every day of our lives. We want to thank Shamim, Professor Fatima Meer's daughters, for letting her come to Chatsworth and share that time with us. We also want to thank Ramesh for the crucial role that he played. People are still there living in Chatsworth. We still stand up knowing our rights because she was a woman that empowered us to stand up and fight. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name's Jerem Reddy, and I speak as a former Vice-Chancellor of a South African university. And from what I've heard, I'm deeply ashamed of the complete abdication and apathy on the part of our universities to say something about what's happening in Palestine. You remember that when we had our academic boycotts, which we called for, the situation in South Africa was nothing as serious as it is in Palestine. Our universities were not destroyed, and yet a large part of the world supported the academic boycott. And I'm at least pleased to hear my alma mater, one university, the University of Western Cape, made a powerful statement against what's happening in Gaza. And I think there are at least three things that our universities can do. One, they can strongly condemn the genocide in Gaza, and in particular, the destruction of universities. Second, we should boycott Israeli universities unless they too condemn the genocide. And third, we should take steps of how we're going to support the people who have been displaced from the universities, the staff and students. Can we admit some of them here? Can we think of the day when how we're going to help rebuild universities in Gaza? My question to Mr. Gina is this. I think we are very pleased, although sometimes, of our inconsistent foreign policy in this country, of the stand they have taken at the International Court. And I think we're proud of that. But I am baffled, Mr. Gina, about the complete, lack of the Arab countries in the Middle East to strongly condemn the genocide, to cut off relations with Israel. And I'm wondering if they are still supplying oil for the genocide machinery in Israel.
Thank you. I think we'll take two more comments or questions and then hand over to the panel.
My name is Zora. I'm from Durban. I want to talk about Palestine. Why do you think, first of all, the ICJ, and secondly, the United Nations, both of them are so quiet? What's happening now? I don't understand.
Thank you, Zora. Professor
Hello. I just would like to respond to Mr. Gina's contribution today. It warmed my heart and my spirit on many fronts, and I want to also thank Prof. Zulu and Monique. I want to say to the students at the back, when I joined the university in 2011, I met Lubna and Debbie Bonnet on email, actually. I joined in May of 2011, and Lubna had informed me that the DVC at the time, Prof. Ayi, who was from Ghana, had invited, and I say this for a particular reason, he had invited the Israeli cultural attaché, and I was absolutely shocked. And all of us spoke to him and wrote to him, and I think he thought this was just three women, why should I pay attention to them? And each of us, in our own way, decided what we were going to do to stop it. Lubna, through her networks, had contacted organizations and individuals, and so did Debbie. I contacted various people, I'm not going to mention their names now. And needless to say, he had to stop. He had to stop it. We got people to fax, his fax machine at the time, and he was very annoyed that, in his mind, that we had done this, and we had told him that South Africa has had a long history of taking a stand against so-called leaders who are perpetrators of massacres and murder, and we do not want to have an Israeli attaché on our campus. I want to say one more thing. In 2013, on this campus, we started Philosophy Born of Struggle, Philosophy Born of Massacres. not only because I found it shocking that there weren't enough people on our campus to show their absolute horror at what had happened in Marikana, but that I had international friends ask me if that was a documentary. They did not believe that it actually happened. I think students, and for those who are UKZN community here, we can say as much as we like about the leadership of any university in the country. We also have to say to ourselves that we are the university, irrespective of whether we are students or professors. We are the university. And if we find that our voices are not heard, and the moral indignation that we suffer through because our university isn't taking a stand, then we have to organize more aggressively in order to make that stand mean something. Because we all know that many people in leadership across South Africa are in leadership not because they have memories, not because they've decided that they want to uphold the dignity and the grace that we have inherited and that we have fought for. Some of them prefer to have amnesia, to forget that the reason we are here is because millions of people, our ancestors, died for us to be here. So for us to sit and watch passively while people are murdered and massacred is not only a crime and a sin, it's not only haram, it's actually morally our obligation to stand up wherever we are. So I'm going to say to you, former SRC and all the students there, this is your university. You are the university. Universities are meant to take forward what communities of struggle, what communities of scholars put forward as our agenda. So if our agenda is to take a greater stand against the atrocities, we have to make it happen. We cannot wait for leadership. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll take one more comment.
Thank you very much. I wanted to quickly make a comment on sociological imagination, like Prof. Monique mentioned. I think today's lecture has been very, very, it has awakened our thinking. And I wanted to ask us sociological questions and make us to leave this place thinking about some of these things. What have we really thought about why our disposition to violence, the same act of violence, might be different? We have spoken a lot about institutions and corporate bodies taking stands, but have we really thought about even why people that might not necessarily have strong things to lose, even within their so-called corporate personal spaces, still have this distance to see the struggle of the people of Palestine or to recognize the violence that is going on there? And that takes me to a very critical part of one of the speakers, critical reflection as to what is normative. We need to think very deeply about what we see as violence. We need to ask ourselves questions. It is possible for us to watch wrestling on TV and not necessarily see it as violence, but you see another act that might not be as physically demanding, and you immediately recognize violence. So, to follow up on that, I want to say something. When we see, how do we begin to see the value of the message? It comes from critically reflecting on how to dismantle what has been seen as normative. Why do we often see the defense and the actions of Israel as justifiable, despite the amount of violence that goes with it, but sees the defense of the people of Palestine as egregious, as dangerous? What glorifies Israel's right to defend itself as a nation and demonize and humanize Palestine's right to defend itself from such aggressions? We really need to ask ourselves questions. And We must also understand, as sociologists, I'm taking it a bit deeper, we must understand the influence of systems. When we have people intentionally manipulating a system, the system itself has been argued in the social sciences to have the capacity to produce influences and manifestations that are outside the thinking of the planner. So in this analysis, we have to complicate what we are experiencing. We need to take our mind out of what is wrong and what is right and try to understand the complexity and the reality of the people that are here. But doing this means that we need to think about what we define as normative and start to ask ourselves questions. How do we have different level of moral closeness to an act of violence because of who is perpetuating the violence? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we'll give the panelists a minute each, or 2 minutes at most, to respond. We're running behind schedule at the moment. If you don't feel it's necessary to respond, then it's fine. Just to say to our last speaker that wrestling is acting. It's very similar to the mainstream narrative. It dupes millions of people into believing it's real. Okay, so who would like to start?
Okay, sorry. Okay, just very quickly, and I just want to apologize that I have to leave very soon because I have to be somewhere at 4:30, so please excuse me, everybody. To the last speaker, I think, you know, your question is really critical to get to that point of normative. I just wanted to say, you know, when it comes to violence, it's very easy for people to dismiss violence as being something which a mob does, you know, but that's generally not the case. You know, most violence is justified in some way or the other. I'm not talking about internal domestic violence, but I'm talking about violence when it takes a mass form. And it is really our responsibility, and I'm going to say this as social scientists, to really understand what the logic, not the illogic, but the logic of violence is. And I think that will hopefully come in the months to come. You know, I remember, anyway, it's something that I'm very interested in. Let me just leave it there. And then, you know, just to really, Zora's point about, you know, why are people so quiet about Palestine? It's a scary, scary situation, Zora, because I think people are becoming more and more quiet rather than more and more angry. And it's very shocking that as the war continues, we see less and less happening around it, and I'm confounded by it. But you're absolutely right, Zora. It's, you know, it is a moment of, it's a watershed moment, Naim, but it's one which is becoming a non-moment, you know, as time goes on, and this is really frightening. You know, another moment has emerged with polio, you know, and that has raised, you know, another consciousness, but it will disappear again too. So I think that's critical. Lastly, because I can't respond to everybody, please, everybody, we are not ordinary and non-ordinary and common and not common people. We are all just people, you know, regardless of where we come from. So I just wanted to just say that so that we all speak with pride and dignity. And lastly, Jerem, thank you for your comments, because I think your points are ones that have been raised with universities, but have also been ignored. And I'm not sure how we go forward from here.
Thank you. If you don't mind, let me, I just want to respond very briefly to Monique before she leaves. First response, Monique, is multifocals. Yes, so the bottom part then is plain. Yeah, I use them, by the way. So no, I think, Monique, your point about, your 2 points. One is about the Palestinian imagination of the future, and the other is the burden of the future. Both extremely important. And I think that this is a big problem in terms of the Palestinian context, both from the Palestinian side and the Israeli side, is that there isn't sufficient work about articulating a vision and imagination for the future. I appreciate this very much because I'm involved with a project called the Indlulamiti Scenarios for South Africa, of course. So imagining the future is all what you do. But it's something that when speaking to Palestinians, I've often raised. That in the South African case, for example, even when in the 80s, we were literally killing each other in the townships. And I'm not talking about Inkatha, etc. I'm talking about the BC movement and the Congress, etc. On the global stage, it was clear that we had one vision of where we wanted to go. If you think about the Palestinian situation, it's not that clear, and I think it's an issue. All the comments that were made are extremely valuable, so I'm not going to respond to the comments, just the two questions that I think I can respond to. One is about the Arab countries. The Arab countries have largely sold out. I mean, I don't know whether any of them is supplying oil to Israel. The Kurdish regional government is not Arab in Iraq, but it's Kurdish, but they do supply oil. Egypt has deals with Israel on gas. Egypt, since Camp David, has been supplying large amounts of Egyptian cotton to Israel, etc., etc. So largely, the Arab states, not all of them, but most of them, have sold out. I don't think that we should expect much more out of the states. We should expect much more in terms of their selling out. The normalization that's continuing. I mean, Saudi Arabia, just a few weeks ago, the Crown Prince met with people from the US officials, and made it clear that as soon as there's a ceasefire, the normalization will proceed. Morocco has gone overboard in terms of their support of Israel. So we don't expect anything from that regard. I think that the future solidarity for the Palestinian people is from the global community, and forcing global South governments to take a position and ignoring the sellout ones in that region. Zora's question about the ICJ and UN. The ICJ has not been quiet. I mean, the ICJ, South Africa, of course, has been like a bulldog at the ICJ, every few months putting in new applications, and the ICJ has responded generally quite well to that, upholding international law, issuing measures against Israel, which Israel does not abide by. The UN, on the other hand, is captured by its 5 non-elected members, the UN Security Council, and that plays out in all of these votes. But even in that instance, in July, was it July? In July, we had a UN Security Council resolution pushed by the United States that called for a ceasefire, that was supported by 14 out of the 15 members of the UN Security Council. And Israel refused to abide by it. And as a result, the United States is now putting forward another proposal to the Palestinians, which is a proposal that no Palestinian can accept. The perpetual occupation of Gaza. So the United Nations is a huge problem in this regard. And the Israeli, the impunity with which Israel responds to the United Nations and the fact that there's no action taken against it is also a huge problem. Just a week or 2 weeks ago, the Israeli ambassador at the United Nations said that the UN headquarters in New York should be wiped off the face of the earth. The UN Secretary General has been called a terrorist. The Security Council has been said to be enabling terrorism by Israel. No action is taken against it, and that is the problem. Israel should be, its membership of the United Nations should be removed. Because firstly, when it was accepted as a member of the UN, there were a number of conditions. One of those conditions was Resolution 194, which is that Israel must accept and implement the right of return of Palestinian refugees, among other things in that resolution. That has not happened. Israel refuses to. The Israeli parliament, the Knesset, has passed 2 resolutions now in the past year, I think, entrenching its position that it will not recognize a Palestinian state. So the UN is a huge problem in this regard, I agree. Professor Zulu passes.
Oh, okay. All right, thank you for those responses. You've met Zora already because she had a small intervention, but she's been waiting for the last 2 hours to deliver an artistic performance. Zora Musa was born deaf. She was the first matriculated deaf person in South Africa during the Apartheid era. Zora completed a B.Ed. Honours, and today she is a diligent teacher at KwaZulu-Natal School for the Deaf in Nchanga. She teaches grade 12 South African Sign Language. Her matriculated deaf learners were listed as top learners in this country for 6 consecutive years. Despite her busy schedule and long hours of teaching, she immerses herself in reading and writing poetry. The anthology titled Silence spans many years. The poems are the canvas through which she expresses her visual world of light, darkness, anger, envy, delight, and sorrow, a mosaic against which she draws her images. The ability to transmit life's experiences and beliefs through poetry is a quality very few people are fortunate to have. It is a gift that Zora Musa gives the world, a world that treats her differently because she is deaf. Zora has been able to astound those around her with her ability to communicate intimate feelings with startling sensitivity and honesty. Her poetry speaks not only about the challenges of deafness, but about how people respond to her as a deaf person. Today, Zora is signing, that's through sign language, her poem entitled Echo of Palestine. And Mary Subramani, a friend, is voicing for Zora. Let's watch and listen to Zora and Mary.
Palestine has been oppressed. Myself, I have also been oppressed. I understand how the people over there feel, but it's in a different way. I have been oppressed how and why? Firstly, I'm deaf. Secondly, I'm Indian. Thirdly, it's because of my religion. I'm Muslim. And fourthly, I'm a woman. I've been oppressed where? In my community, in my workplace, everywhere. That's why I feel a connection with Palestinians. I feel a connection deep inside. That's why I wrote a poem that comes from deep within my heart. I hope you will enjoy. The title of the poem, Echo of Palestine. Echo of cries, making hearts weep. From the holy soil of Palestine to divine heavenlies deep, in the thundering rhythm of enemies, tanks, and bombs, shaken the soil of Palestine. From sunrise to sunset, days and nights of terror, of fear, so horrific to bear. Amidst the terror and chaos, Gaza stands strong. The holy soil of Palestine, where the hearts belong. Amidst the heartbroken and losses of the beloved. The bruised spirits remain. The weaknesses unmoved. From every angle of Gaza, the young and old, Palestine's truthful stories, so boldly be told. Youngsters, women, men, and children mightily fight with ancient stones hand in hand, persisting to protect the sacred, pure land. The powerful courage remains through struggles and pain. Echo of hope, echo of resistances, echo of strength. The mightiest faith remains. In every smoky air, in every anguished sigh, in every unbearable turmoil, in every bitter cry, shackled in any enemy's injustice and oppression, in every sly whisper, in every ghostly glance, in every scary rhythm, in every poisonous bomb, in every bloodstain, Palestine's gigantic spirits shall crack every piece of titan chains. Freedom is calling. In every tender heartbeat, in every innocent blood, in every awful memory, in every pure faith, in every courageous brawling, echo of vigorous faith symbolizes open wings, chasing away gloom and doom, calling the vastness of freedom, like the endless skies with mountainous hope for freedom. The freedom shall rise and redeem the sweet cultural folk song, forever the lifelong echo of Palestine.
Thank you to Zora and Mary for that powerful rendition. Friends, we have to move on quite speedily, so I'm going to immediately call Dr. Patha, who will talk about the Meer archives.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the University and Library Services Management Team, it's my pleasure to be here today to speak briefly about the Prof. Fatima Meer archives. The library's special collections are invaluable, serving as a vital channel for preserving cultural heritage, providing insights into the past, and significantly influencing research and the transfer of knowledge. At the University Library Services, particularly within special collections, our primary strategic objective is to enhance the accessibility and visibility of these materials. We're focusing on digitizing rare and fragile publications. To maintain the availability of special collections for current and future generation of library users, The library is dedicated to conserving and preserving these materials to enhance their durability. We are committed to long-term physical preservation of collections to support research, teaching, learning, and academic success for both the university community and external researchers. By digitizing the special collection and loading it onto an open access platform, it gives the special collection a place to exercise its intention, telling its story to those who interact with it. We have a responsibility to record faithfully the history and social, cultural, religious, political, educational, and recreational life of the community, and to make these resources accessible to the world. In this way, we guarantee the safekeeping of these items and the continuation of our cultural heritage. So currently we have approximately 300 items of various books, journal articles, and manuscripts of Prof. Meer, which we'd like to develop, digitize, and preserve. Prof. Meer produced over 40 books, some as an author, some as editor, and some as publishers. Her lectures, conference papers, and correspondence made a major impact on international audiences and enhanced her international reputation as one of the country's most articulate Black spokespersons. She has also been the recipient of numerous honors and awards conferred on her by governments and institutions both at home and abroad. Her father was the editor and owner of the Indian Views that was founded in 1912. The Gandhi Latuli Documentation Center at our Westville campus has this print newspaper in its collection, and we're in the process of digitizing it. The photographs and images that you see displayed here today are from that archival collection. So we'd like to appeal to you to donate any items of Prof. Fatima Meer, whether it's an artifact, a journal, correspondence, manuscript, or archive, or artwork to this archive. And we, the library services, we undertake to preserve and store these items in our archive. UKZN Library Services has an institutional and data repository, and we have the necessary infrastructure to develop and store this collection. We've created a website for Prof. Meer's collection, so your donations are welcome. And you can email that to fmeerarchives@ukzn.ac.za. As a librarian myself, I can share that it's very important to document this valuable collection and to make it accessible for many generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Patha. Keep up the great work. And the penultimate item on our agenda today, Professor Mariam Sidat will present the Clinical Sociology Book Prize.
Good afternoon and a warm welcome to the 2024 Clinical Sociology postgraduate students, academics, alumni, parents, guardians, family, friends, and colleagues. A sociological legacy, years of planning, curriculum development, bureaucracy, accreditation, SACWA, and Senate approval were by all means exhausting. In October 2021, the unknown postgraduate clinical and applied sociology program at the UKZN received 100 applications. Only 20 scholars each year were invited to read for the germinal degree. The clinical and applied program, an eminent master's, has received unyielding support from the International Sociological Association, the AACS, and KPAX. I'm pleased to report that the accreditation with the Commission is now in process. With successful KPAX accreditation, we will join one of only 4 universities in the world with an accredited clinical sociology program. The vision for a clinical and applied sociology program was born under Professor Fatima Meer and Ramesh's mentorship in the early 90s at the Institute for Black Research. As a master's candidate, I worked tirelessly conducting research, driving, filing, sorting, archiving, a professional and personal experience that thrust me into the field of clinical and applied work. Acknowledging and extending deep gratitude for the IBR internship has culminated in multiple collective local and global efforts that undoubtedly seek to advance the intellectual project. Professor Fatima Meer deserved far more recognition for pioneering work, dismantling systemic and institutional patriarchy. Her work is by no means complete. We at the UKZN and the broader academic community are to be tasked with memorializing the life and time of Professor Meer. As an early Southern woman sociologist of apartheid, she disrupted the sustained narrative and gendered brutality with reconciliation for love of country. She expressed her love for life by repeated references to bluer than the blue sea and bluer than the blue sky. Albeit long overdue, this afternoon, UKZN celebrates Fatima Meer's intellectual contribution to public engaged sociology. We begin in small part by writing her thorny past, a complex institutional relationship with the third Professor Fatima Clinical Sociology Book Prize. The prestigious accolade is conferred on a single laureate with theoretical, clinical, applied micro and macro disciplinary knowledge that underscores a specified clinical intervention. The laureate demonstrates evidence that upholds Meer's professional and ethical values. Professor Meer's sociological legacy authenticates a prodigious commitment to resolving social problems through clinical interventions in marginalized communities. It is with great pleasure I introduce you to a product of the Clinical and Applied Sociology program, Dr. Alabi, who will now announce the winner.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Prof. After careful assessment of the 2024 Clinical and Applied Sociology, I take great pleasure to introduce the 2024 winner of the Professor Fatima Meer Clinical Sociology Book Prize. In 2023, Ms. Makaya Sibusisiwe Hope graduated with a Bachelor of Science from Howard University of KwaZulu-Natal, Howard College. She graduated with several distinctions in sociology. She is currently reading and studying for her honors in clinical sociology under my supervision and Prof. She attended Primrose Primary School and Eden Glen High in Johannesburg. Her research focused on examining the impact of witnessing domestic violence in childhood homes on postgraduate students at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, Howard College campus. Sibusisiwe has demonstrated exceptional capabilities and proficiencies, not just the conceptualization and the thought process that went into the study, but also in the writing and the planning. She also brought on the impact of gender-based violence in teasing out these dynamics. The laureate is currently developing a clinical intervention for postgraduate students at UKZN Howard College. The laureate has delivered rigorous scholarship, complex theoretical framework within the field of clinical sociology. It is my privilege to confer the 2024 Professor Fatima Meer's Clinical Sociology Book Prize to Ms. Makaya Sibusisiwe Hope. Please join me in congratulating and welcoming the 2024 laureate and community agent, Ms. Makaya Sibusisiwe Hope. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm deeply honored and incredibly grateful to be the recipient of the 2024 Professor Fatima Meer Book Prize. This recognition is particularly meaningful to me, given Professor Meer's profound influence in the field of sociology. This recognition is also significant as it comes just a few days after my birthday, making it a truly meaningful and cherished gift. Professor Fatima Meer left an indelible mark in the field of sociology with her pioneering work, which continues to shape our understanding today. Her ability to bridge complex theoretical concepts and practical applications was and continues to be truly groundbreaking. I deeply admire her dedication to addressing social inequalities and the relentless pursuit to improving lives by understanding the complexities of social dynamics. While this award bears my name, it is not just about my efforts. It reflects all the collaborative efforts and unwavering support from my mentors, peers, and community. I'd like to express my gratitude to Ms. Londiwe Jali for telling me about the clinical sociology program and for encouraging me to pursue it. I'm also deeply thankful to Professor Sirat Khan, Dr. Govender, Dr. Ara, Dr. Alabi, and Dr. Akinlade for their intellectual challenges and unwavering support. Yes, there were definitely times when the workload felt like an academic boot camp, but the invaluable guidance and constructive feedback have undoubtedly been instrumental to my growth. I extend my sincere appreciation to Whitbeck Contracts, my family, and my friends for their steadfast support, especially during the times when the finish line just seemed beyond reach. A special thank you to my colleagues for all the hours we spent on WhatsApp calls, studying, guiding each other through assignments, and reminding each other that we can do it. As we collectively strive towards the completion of our final projects for the year, I wish you all the best. Despite the hurdles, our perseverance has got us this far, and I'm confident that with dedication and continued fortitude, we can emerge stronger. You all have my unwavering support. This prize signifies more than individual achievement. It is a tribute to the resilience and strength that is inherent in our communities, serving as a reminder of the immense possibilities within our reach. It reaffirms the belief that despite the adversities, triumph is always attainable. I'm eager for the future, especially for the completion of my research projects. I hope that as I continue to grow, I'll be able to expand it and expand the clinical interventions in ways that will improve and touch the lives of many. I'm committed to continue applying my sociological imagination to addressing challenges and social issues, aspiring to inspire all those behind me in a manner that honors the remarkable legacy left by Professor Meer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Sidat. I'm sure you'll concur that listening to our students speak like that is probably one of the most rewarding parts of being in academia. To see the fruits of your labor is really great. So before I call Mr. Harcharan to do the vote of thanks and to actually bring this meeting to closure, let me say thank you to every one of you. You sat patiently for 2 hours or more. And I admire your resilience. In many senses, we are speaking to the converted in a gathering like this one. But it strengthens our commitment, it reinforces our resolve in that quest for peace and justice. And I think that it's important that we do that. And in the process, we also commemorate and celebrate the life of one of our heroes of the struggle. And it's up to all of us and civilized people everywhere to resist all forms of oppression, exploitation, annexation, and gratuitous violence. And I think the challenges are stark and there for us as academics, intellectuals, and so on. We've gained a lot from the discussions today. Thanks for the presentations by Naim Gina and Professor Paulus Zulu. They were excellent presentations. They came from different perspectives, but reinforced each other in the way in which it came across and the message that we heard. The parallels in the struggle against apartheid, both in Palestine and in South Africa, became clear during the course of the afternoon. We saw, for example, Naim speak about the destruction of evidence, and I remember not too long ago, Professor Jerry Kuvadia said to me at one of our meetings that we don't have to worry about recording our history because the special branch is doing it for us at every meeting. And all of that evidence was destroyed. So there's nothing that we got, the recordings of our history that we expected would be there in the archives are not there. But I think importantly, the question of dehumanization and dignity comes to the fore. It's a struggle that we continue to have in the South African context, albeit under different conditions, and that impels us to continue in that struggle for progressive change. And if one thinks about the Balfour Declaration in 1917, when 94% of the residents of Palestine at the time were Arab, the word Arab or Palestinian was never used in the declaration. They were called non-Jewish people. And in a very similar way, in South Africa, we've historically been referred to by that ugly term, non-whites, non-entities, referring to what we are not through the eyes of the oppressor. And which is why we actually set up the Institute for Black Research as a countervailing tendency to that kind of ideological oppression and domination, to say that we are proud to be black, we can do research ourselves, on ourselves, and publish it in a manner that brings pride to black people. And that was the decolonial aspect of the work that was done in the past. A decoloniality of the mind that continues today and that we're hoping to reintroduce into universities. The use of international law that you spoke about also began a long time ago with the first declaration against apartheid at the United Nations, continuing today. And I think we can be proud to be South Africans, given our country's response at the International Court of Justice. So whilst there's authoritarianism and there's alienation and there's enemy, there's always countervailing tendencies in a society to authoritarianism, for democracy and for progressive means to change society. And we see that whilst we may be critical of our government, there are many things we can be really proud of in terms of what we've achieved over the past 30 years. The role of universities, we spoke about, that's the challenge. I think Professor Reddy and others have made it clearer. And we hope that that universities would respond in a more appropriate way. It's going to be a difficult struggle, but it was the same under apartheid, where small groups of people challenged the system and were able to overcome at the end, punching well above their weight divisions. So I want to say thank you to all of you and call now Mr. Ramesh Harcharan to deliver the vote of thanks.
Good afternoon, colleagues, friends, members of the Meer family, everybody that's here. Before I do the vote of thanks, I just want to relate two bits of information or share some of the... I had 22 years of a beautiful life with Prof. Meer, and I cannot help but share some of that with you here today. By the way, Zora Musa, her publication, Silence, was published by Madiba Press and a subsidiary of the Institute for Black Research in 1997. The other bit of information, I think I stated this last year at the memorial lecture, South Africa's stance on Palestine. Prof. Meer was solely responsible in 1994 for South Africa to take a stance on Palestine. I recall the incident very clearly, where we put together a dossier of the atrocities against the Palestinians by the Israelites. And we sent that to the president then, Mandela. And after a week or two, there was no response from his office. So she called him up, and I tell you now that he used to be scared of her. And I mean that, and Shenaz will bear testimony to this. There was an event at the opening of our monument, and he was going to spend more time with Rajbansi than at our event, and she refused to go and honor that event. She refused to go to the event, and Shenaz went to that event and represented her. Coming back to the Palestine issue, and she called him up and said, why isn't there a statement from the South African government condemning this act? And he didn't see, his office hadn't given him the dossier that we sent up. So we had to resend that dossier to his office, and thereafter, an official statement was put out by the South African government condemning the atrocities against the Palestinians. Somebody needs to write this someday and remember Prof for her role in drawing the attention of Mandela, an international figure, to that event. Before I do the vote of thanks, I just want to honor or utter a few words or make a short statement. At the Harold Walpy Memorial Lecture delivered by Prof. Meer in 2007, Dennis Brutus, who was then a writer and a longtime anti-apartheid activist, recited a poem simply entitled For FM, and it read as follows. It is in the face of endurance, in the face of disappointment, in the face of betrayal, that equality shines clear. It is in endurance that equality shines. In that steadiness, unfailing brightness, that her starry quality shows clear. This embodies the Fatima Meer, or the Prof, as many of you called her, was, very succinctly in a few lines. It captures her life, it captures the person she was. The question of race and class and the disappointment of the surge of neoliberalism shaped Prof. Meer's struggle alongside the poor and oppressed peoples of South Africa. She believed the poor were poor, not because of a lack of resources, but because of the high imbalances in the distribution of these resources. And I'm going to quote from a paper she delivered in 1998 at the World Philosophers Meet in Geneva. And this is what she had to say. Academics have shored us against our conscience by developing theories and rationalizations that, in the final analysis, blames the poor for their poverty and absolves the rich for their responsibilities. This shaped her lifelong advocacy and struggle for the poor and underprivileged, who bore the brunt of inequality and exploitation. She led an extraordinary life of social and political activism, directed in the main at community-oriented developmental work. She challenged anti-poor policies like privatization and cost recovery from the poor. And she was labeled then by her contemporaries and her comrades. She wore the label of being a counter-revolutionary with pride. Prof. Meer always asked us that regardless of how many years we have spent in this life, we must get up and shout at any form of injustice. And I'm going to pause for a moment and acknowledge a few people that are here in the audience, the people that she spent the most time with, where she practiced her craft of sociology. And you met one earlier on, Oline Naidu and her community from Unit 3, Westcliff. At the back, we have Brandon Pillay and the residents of the flat dwellers of Unit 2, Chatsworth. And these are the people that meant and mattered more to Prof. Meer and the people that lived in Mhlanga and everywhere else. the privileged people of this country. These are the people that mattered more to her, to such an extent that she would lay her life for their well-being. She would stand in front of tear gas, live ammunition, police dogs, to protect the communities that serviced her, or that she assisted. And emerging from these associations, we have community leaders that we never had before, community leaders that represent the majority, the poor. Oli Naidu is a leader on her own. Braden Pillay was 17 years old when we met him in 1999. He was a high school student then. Today, he has graduated, he's completing his PhD. He has served our country as a member of parliament and still continues to serve his community. And we applaud him for that. And all the communities that still take a leaf out of Fatima's book and take a leaf out of the experiences they had with her to honor her and do the work that she has been doing. And she left us a rich legacy, and I implore all at this lecture today, let us not confine our activism to lecture halls and academic journals. Let us embrace the communities we research, the communities we write about, the communities we analyze to make their lives better. We don't have that anymore. We have lecture hall activism, and if we could do that and work to better the lives of the communities we serve or we write about, how much better our lives would be. Coming back to the task that I'm at hand, and that is thanking those that made this lecture a great success. Any event of this nature cannot be successful without the involvement of and hard work of a number of people and service providers. There have been endless number of meetings prior to this event, and we would like to thank the following people: members of the Meer family that are here for supporting the lecture and playing an active role in organizing this lecture event. In particular, Judge Yasmin Shenaz Meer, Shamim Meer, Dr. Zain Mari, Nadia Meer, and Rosina, that's somewhere in the audience. Our speakers and panelists, Professor Zulu, Mr. Naim Gina, Professor Monique Marks, who has left us, Professor Dasra Chetty for accepting the invitation to deliver the 2024 lecture and making outstanding presentations. Prof. Chetty for serving as Director of Proceedings for today's event, Ms. Zora Musa and her assistant Mary Subramani for the heartwarming performance of poetry. Prof. Rosina Mart for the welcome on behalf of the School of Social Sciences, the UKZN College of Humanities, Corporate Relations, and School of Social Sciences, especially Ms. Rashika Sibrin, Ms. Ginny, I think I'm going to get this wrong again, Jeannie Naidu, and Ms. Neil Naidu, and Mr. Sifiso Zulu for assisting with the event logistics and finances, Ms. Nonhlanhla Mkwanaz for administrative support, and the officers of the Deputy Vice Chancellor, Prof. Nhlanhla Mkhize, and the Dean of Social Sciences, Prof. Vivian Oyong. The members of the Prof. Meer family, Prof. Meer Memorial Lecture Committee for the contribution towards organizing the lecture event, Professor Mariam Sidat for coordinating the Clinical Sociology Book Prize, Dr. Roshni Patha, Mr. Thiru Munsami, and Ms. Claudette Kesival, and the Professor Meer Archives team for working to curate a comprehensive archive of Prof. Meer's work. And Solutions and the UKZN sound and technical team for assisting with the audio, live streaming, and video and photographic documentation of this event. The caterers, Gravy Bowl for the refreshments, seating plan, and UKZN, CMS and horticulture for the stage decor, our student volunteers and ushers, our community and civil society organizations such as the KZN Palestine Solidarity Forum and others who joined us today. Our representatives from Ike's Bookshop and the Dennis Hurley Center for managing the book sales outside. They have some lovely publications. You may want to support them. And you, the audience, lastly, for gracing us with your presence today. Thank you very much. God bless you all.
Thank you, Ramesh. We now bring this meeting to a close. Thank you.
MC, so we'd just like to present you with that. Can I ask Prof. Sidat to please come and present these? Thank you so much. Yeah. Oops, sorry about that. And can I ask Zora Musa to please come up and to please receive a token of appreciation? Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Let's post this picture.
Tungapenda kobo yaka